Again, I'm Sherry Naudine. I'm the owner of Collegiate Sports Advocate. We are usually on TikTok. I usually have a group of people that we're on TikTok with, and we had some technical difficulties last week. So, Devin was supposed to be on here with me tonight, and she had an emergency. It's just that time of year. So, I am going to go it alone and just give you a lot of information about recruiting and what's going on in softball and everything softball, and just talk about whatever it is the listening audience wants to talk about. So, again, thank you for joining, and hopefully we'll get a few more people to join in with us today. So, hey, Jackie, I was just getting started. My guest uh, is not able to make it here, so I don't know if you want to speak. Let me know. I will send you a request. There she is. Okay, yay. Oh, I'm so glad you're here because my host couldn't make it tonight. Something came up, and I was just going to go it alone. You know how I am. So welcome, Jackie.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. I was just going to go through I'll start right now. I was just introducing myself, Sherry Naudine, owner of Collegiate Sports Advocate, and my favorite co-host, Jackie. So,
Hey,
Dr.
everybody. I'm
Jackie.
Jackie Wins. I'm from New Jersey. I am a former D2 athlete, a dual sport, not in softball, as I typically say, but I've gotten into the softball world as I've continued to invest in women's sports. And I do join from time to time as much as I can, Sherry here on Monday nights.
Love it. And I'm an hour earlier than normal. And I was telling everybody because normally we do TikTok at this hour, and we had some technical difficulties this last week. And then my guest, Devin, was unfortunately not able to make it at the last minute tonight. So, and that's kind of how we are on TikTok. We're not as formal, we just go with it. So I thought I'd bring kind of the same style over here and see if we can get an active and interactive listening audience. If not, one thing we do know about our Twitter audience or our X audience is we get a lot of replays. And you can actually go to my website, collegiatesportsadvocate.com, go up to my media page, and you will see everything we've done in the last 5-6 years now. We've had some very notable college coaches up here, and I was explaining earlier, it's harder to get them up here now because podcasting got very, very popular. So tonight, and Jackie, what made me think of this topic tonight was I went to a lot of college games the last 2 weeks. I went live to Division One, kind of mid-major layer, and then of course I watched so much softball on TV. I almost felt like an overload at one point, but I thought, isn't it interesting to see now that I've been in recruiting for 10 years, the effects of what's going on and some of the changes? So I'll go way back when I started. They used to have 53 days of open recruiting, and Patty Gasso could show up at Jada Coleman's volleyball game, right? And it was not a restrictive calendar in which they were able to see. And there's some good and bad of the recruiting calendars and what they do, but they kind of compartmentalized it. Now, I'm a compartmentalized person, so that works for me, but they were getting rid of the early recruiting that was happening in 7th and 8th grade. And I've got one of them playing at Michigan right now. Lily Bellamont was one of the 8th graders committed back then. But a lot of changes have happened for that class of 22 class. I think they probably went through the majority of the big, huge changes of the calendar, and then getting rid of the early recruiting and seeing the effects of that now. I can't really name too many of the early recruits that are still there. I think one of the Mercado kids at Kentucky, it was an early 8th grade recruit, and she's still there and still playing. So it's great to see that, but a lot changes in a young athlete's life in that short of a time frame. So what I was seeing when I was out there is it's funny how people kind of cluster together. And I know, Jackie, you're a people person and you're out there, but there's these travel teams that get kind of a feeling about themselves and a kind of a culture about themselves. And guess what? They all show up in college together. And a negative one is some of them, griping and bitching about the travel ball world. All of a sudden you look around and like they're all on the same team, still griping and bitching about the world, right? Somehow they have a little chip on their shoulder, and they think somehow, some way, the coach didn't treat them right. I mean, you should see the stuff I hear, or hear the stuff I hear in the audience at some of these games. So a lot of people don't know who I am in person, so it's pretty funny to listen to. But that's the biggest change. Jackie, you see any of that out and about where you're at?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you're now seeing a lot of teams sort of pulling from those specific clubs and then the girls wanting to stay together. I think there used to be this old school mentality of, oh, look where I'm going to go. Oh, yeah, well, you're going there. Look where I'm going to go. And that has changed. And there's positives and negatives to that, right? There's a positive aspect of, wanting to play with who you grew up with and keeping that mantra, but I always wonder if it has to do because high school sports are sometimes, in certain areas of the country losing, that participation, if it's sort of creating that in the club atmosphere.
That is a good thought. In fact, I used to tell people, whoever you're playing with on your team, you're unlikely going to go to college together. You're most likely going to play against each other because you're of the same talent layer. But this last couple of years, I've had pairs, and I called one school. In fact, I've got 4 24s playing at Houston. I go, want a bouquet of 24s? And may I brag on them for a minute? Emily Prochechka, she was the third baseman that participated in that triple play. And this is interesting because she's not been one of the key starting nine players. And let me tell you, this kid is something special. So I think some of the things that I hear on the sidelines, and this is not the team that I was sitting with hearing these things, but it's interesting that you hear and see what's happening, but it takes time for a college coach to figure out where you gel and you jive with the rest of the team. Because now you're dealing with an incoming freshman dealing with three classes above them, kids that have maybe been on the field a little longer, contributing in a different way. And I always say to the student athletes, take your time and just keep being irreplaceable, because I do get phone calls. I had 3 phone calls this weekend from parents because I do stay with them till they graduate college. And what happens there is they call me up and they say, I'm not understanding what's going on. Something's happening here. And when you walk them through it and you kind of flip it around to going back to what we do as a decision grid, is saying, why did you choose this school? What is it about it? And then let's work out what you control and what you don't control and what you influence. And then all of a sudden, you start peeling away the layers of the issues, and it becomes a little bit more transparent that it's not as terrible as maybe the student athlete feels it is or the parents feel it is. See a lot of parents sitting there going, my kid's not in the lineup. What's going on? And it's only been 2 weekends, right? So that's an interesting perspective, Jackie, about the pairs, because I've got 3 or 4 at Lamar. I've had 11 on University of New Mexico, and that was by accident. It was 2 separate coaching staffs, but I've got 3 at Boise State. I mean, it's just crazy how they're starting to work out. I've got 1 coming into Maryland. I've got 2 at Maryland. I've got 1 at Georgia. I'd like a few more at Georgia. Some of those big ones. Yes, Jackie, interrupt me anytime. There's going to be a chitty chatty space
No,
tonight.
no, you're spewing some good stuff there. There was somebody who did comment on the space. It said 2029 grad. Do you start by reaching out to teams first or going to camps?
Oh gosh, you're talking to the expert here, 2029 class. If you go to collegiatesportsadvocate.com, you can look at my page. I've committed 655 student athletes, but I actually flipped the script. I think you have to get on a team where your talent is somewhat matched and play your age group. And I'd be curious to know where in the country you play, and if you want to share your team name, that's totally fine. And Jackie will read the place here for me. I can give you lots of free advice, but I always tell people it's your talent level, the team you're on, where you're playing, and who you're getting showcased in front of. Camping is misunderstood. If you're camping in 7th and 8th grade and your talent isn't ready for that, how do you know if your talent is ready for that, right? You might be camping too early and getting off a list instead of working on your skill set. It is an old name. The name is camp. And so, of course, you want to go and you want to learn and you want to develop, but there's certain camps where it is that emphasis. And most camps, when you're in 9th grade or above, are actually, I just got a shout out to New Mexico State on there. But when you are actually out there and you maybe are too young and maybe not developed enough, you didn't do yourself a good favor. So I always say timing is everything. But there really is a secret way or a better way to do it when it's recruiting, which is go out, be seen where you can play, be at the biggest, best tournaments where you can play. And that's always the big question. And then decide whether or not you should go in. And my rule of thumb is do the system the way they wrote it. They're the decision maker. Email them, invite them to see you play. If they're not showing up to see you play, there's several reasons why. You need somebody like me to answer those questions for you. And then, oh yes, Southern Force. Okay, I see that. Yeah, and it's a good brand. It's a good team. It's a notable organization. I'll be curious where you're at because that used to come out of the Georgia area, but I think they franchised a little bit. But then get the feedback. If they're not showing up on the sidelines, then you're either not at the right tournaments or your talent isn't ready for them. I usually joke because I'm based out of Texas. If you want Florida State to show up here, haven't seen them in a while. Look on their rosters. They go where they go. My host on TikTok does a great thing. Her name's Coach Margot. She goes out and actually looks at where Patty Gasso recruited from. I mean, Patty Gasso recruits a lot from the Orange County Batbusters. She recruits, Jada Coleman was from Texas Glory. You'd be shocked to see that there's not as many Texans as there could be, right? But they really go through, Coach Margot goes through and lists it all. And it's interesting. And it does change over time because, again, that layer of the sport way up here, they could be in Alaska for all they, care. They're going to go find the few that can at that layer. So hopefully that answered your question there. But you have to go to the right tournaments. You have to be seen. And in 14 and under at your age group, you need to be on a great team making notice, right? My husband is hot shots in DFW. Coaches show up because we got. In fact, you ought to go look at this home run hit off this kid this kid hit today. Her name's Brooklyn Tallow. And she walks up and her swag is enough just to see her walk into the box. And then the first pitch, first swing, boom. And I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, they send me their home runs to post, right? And she's new to our team. So I was like, wow, this girl is special. And that's all you got to do is take one look at him. And that that's a kid legit. She's got size, she got power, but it just was that it factor when she walked up into the box, right? And that's the kind of kid we pick up the phone and we make phone calls. Hey, you guys see this kid, but we're not trying to send him to camp immediately because I mean, some of these big schools, I'm not going to rat them out because I love them. And I do send kids when it's their time, but you send them to the right camp. They'll have 6 or 8 camps a year. There'll be a right camp at the right time for the right grad year. And then if you're in that talent layer, and then you get a little bit more special attention and you'll see it if you're not sorted into that group that's getting all the attention. You're going to go, I get it. I've had those phone calls back. Hey, did you not call that coach and tell them I was coming because we didn't get sorted in that group? I'm like, yeah, we did, and you got your answer. So sometimes you don't want to do that. You really have to have a trusted advisor not helping you drag your kid through the inevitable no right to their face, right? So that's a lot of what I do is helping you understand the layer of the sport that you can play at and when. The timing is so important. The timing of emailing is also so important. So I don't want to get too far off onto everything I do, but if you have more questions, I love it. And if you guys will share the space out, give us a retweet because we do always pick up steam because I am an hour earlier than I normally go. But I was talking to Jackie, Coach Jackie here about, or Dr. Jackie, about the results of some of the recruiting that we see now in college. I worked with these kids in 7th and 8th grade. This class of 26, I've had since the 7th grade. And it's amazing to see them grow and develop and what they're doing. This class of 24, I was their catcher trainer when they were 7. And I'm like, look at my little babies. I put a picture of them up there the other day. They were with me at the College World Series. And one is at Lamar, one is the lefty pitcher at Boise, and the other one's a middle infielder at Grand Canyon. And they were little babies. And it's just neat to see them grow and all that they went through, right? And those 3 played 10 and under since the beginning. They played for me. Then they played 12s for my son, and then they played 16s for my husband. And it's just neat to see them, but they all went different conferences, different places, and it's just amazing to see it. But what the secret to their success was you do have to play at the level where your kid can play, and you have to go where you get development and you're prepared to play in college. And then back to the pairs, I've got two at Mizzou. I've got, they somehow went in pairs most recently. And I would say it's because there's certain coaches that will dive in with certain travel teams and they really start to see what they like. My husband jokes and calls them his buyers, right? I've got three going to Creighton. I have three going to South Dakota. It's the craziest thing you've ever seen. But I think it's because the coaches start to like the travel ball coaching style and the product that they deliver. So you want to start thinking marketing terms, a product and a decision maker, and the freshness on the shelf and whether or not it's going to be fresh and ready to play when they get there. So those were some of the things I saw this weekend was just the culture of the travel ball kids kind of clustering together or playing at least at the same layer that they did in travel ball. It doesn't really change that much. The harder in the demands on an incoming high school player now is a lot harder. And my son was just finishing my 2026 recruit class, and I only had 22 so far. 2026s come off the board in fall, compared to 24s. I had 44 come off. In 25s, I had 30 come off. And I typically have about the same amount of kids. And what it was this um, shift that's happening in college with the portal, with the COVID year is now gone, but the effects of it is still there because, as an example, the 22 class, we had 20% go into JUCO to secure a spot because they were in the COVID mess. Well, those 22s came out in the summer, and 12 of them got placed. Well, that's 12 spots that would have gone to, not just on my database, but in recruiting, it would have been a student athlete coming out of high school. And I had somebody ask today, and that's why this topic's fresh on my mind. Well, why is that? And I said, think of it this way. If you've got a kid, a young lady, or a son, we have baseball also. We do all sports, but baseball and softball. And they go into JUCO. They'll play 90 games a year. They're going to play 180 games, where in 4 years at Division One, you don't even play that many games. And all of a sudden, they're going to be a junior transferring in, let's say, as a pitcher. Well, they've gotten bigger, thicker, stronger. They faced bigger, faster, stronger talent. And now all of a sudden they go into transfer. They're bigger and better and stronger and more of a refined product than an incoming freshman who hasn't faced 3 years above her in talent level and experience and exposure. So I hope you're following me there, because a freshman walks in, they got to face the three classes above them. So it's really, really hard as a freshman to hit the field when you could transfer a JUCO kid or a portal kid that maybe didn't have the same success. And some of us see it in the business. Some of us see those JUCO kids transferring and we're like, I love this part. Red flag. Sometimes, sometimes I have that for my TikToks. Sometimes the JUCO transfers come with a story. They come with a red flag. But I also say sometimes a college coach has an opening for a red flag. Like maybe there's a coach change, maybe there's a culture shift, maybe they lost a player with an injury. We see a lot of injuries, a lot of injuries. That could be a whole nother segment. A whole lot of injuries happening in college that are hard to fix and hard to replace. So, that is some of the reason. But going back to my history lesson here of being in it for 10 years, there's always been transfers. We're just more polarized on it now, and more high level kids are transferring than they used to. It used to just be filling holes. Like my daughter played at Kansas when a brand new coach came in. It creates a shift of people that are either going to stick with their commitment or they leave. We were happy to stay and be part of it. In fact, my daughter ended up being one of the first ones to sign for her. And she's now the head coach at North Carolina. So, there the snowball effect of relationships start. But I think it's really important that you see that history was there, but now the high profile portal changes that we see now, or the ones that are more notable, sometimes those are hard, man. Their stomach, gut punches because you build your team around that core anchor kid, and then a year into it and you think nothing's wrong, you think that everything's going good, they go into the portal transfer and boom, there goes, the anchor on your team that you built that class around, and now the shuffle happens. So that's why recruiting for 2026 is really slowed down, is coaches aren't spending their money that they have available. They don't need to spend it until after May. After they're done playing, then they're allowed to go back out and get recruiting again, and then they'll have an understanding of who stayed on their roster, who's in the portal, who's not, and then where to spend their money. So that's kind of why the slowdown has happened and why that's affected student athletes coming out of high schools recruiting. Really slowed down the 26. It's been the hardest class so far. Um, and there, this is the next one. I saw a tweet today. I think it was Softball America, and I do want to talk about these publications, Jackie. So don't let me forget. It's on my notes here. Um, but I think it was Softball America. I think it was Tara that made a response on Twitter to somebody that was talking about the pitching, being 68 to 75 or whatever. And I'm like, no, I actually responded, and I don't normally get into banter on Twitter. But I was like, could we just give some props to the big hitters? I mean, I saw some good hitters the last 2 weekends on, mid-major teams that are just crushing the ball. And it's like, man, they'll go through 3 or 4 pitchers that are very competent pitchers, but it's hard to get by some of the bigger, better bats. So I don't think it's velo only. I think it's a combination of velo and spin and, technique and some of it, I call it chutzpah. They get out there and they look like a killer, and they're not throwing at anything different, but it's their mannerism or their body language when they come up to the mound and what they're saying with their demeanor. So, Jackie, what did you see with some of the pitching and hitting?
I mean, if you want to talk about the breakout of the freshmen this weekend, it felt like every team had a freshman absolutely crush it. Whether it was Oklahoma, was Florida, so on. I mean, definitely a big year in recruiting where freshmen are really taking hold. So that changes the game. You ask a lot of questions on, why is that different? Especially we have so many transfers. The competition is at its highest. How do you sort of approach that situation when you're even in the recruiting cycle? It's not easy anymore. It's not like, okay, I see who's in front of me and that's where I'll follow. You don't know what tomorrow brings, and there's a lot that goes with it. So I mean, this weekend really sort of shined that. I think that you do have this emphasis a little bit for some reason on pitching speed this year, which, and I don't know if that's just the evolution of the game, but overall, yeah, big swings. I mean, lots,
Yeah.
multiple grand slams. I mean, I don't know if it's just a different mentality training wise. I don't know if it's just, maybe more coverage. You hear about it more because softball is now being streamed and everything else a lot more than typically. So I'm not sure, but I mean,
I
huge.
will give it up to some of the training and like the development of the actual softball, being played at the club level. I mean, these coaches have gotten really, really good in their techniques, and they're learning and growing from these college coaches. So I feel like their training has changed and they're developing earlier, and they're taking it serious. I don't see as much multi-sport athletes because the demand is really there to be the best at your game. So and think you also talked about the freshmen going out there and doing something big. I mean, I love seeing it because it's breakout, and yes, there are some of those 24s out there that can and they get out there and they can do it. But it is harder to be a high school student athlete transferring in. The recruiting calendars are tight. Go for it, Jackie.
I also thought it was interesting that you're seeing a lot of two ways, right? You're seeing a lot of pitchers hit, or whether it be Nija, Ball, so on. I mean, that's becoming, with Ricketts sort of breaking into that, and then it sort of went away for a little bit, the two way. I mean, here and there, but I mean, now you have athletes, right? Like
Yes.
that's what people are not realizing. It's you can't just go in for one position anymore. You have to be able to play anywhere to capitalize and get that chance.
Well, it's funny you say that because I did get on a thread where somebody had said the same thing about, it's so great to see more pitchers getting to hit. And I've always been of the belief if you can hit, they're going to hit you. They're going to give you every opportunity. My husband's team won Alliance 16U 2 years ago with a kid that was a pitcher and a hitter, and she was everything. And she's a fierce competitor. And yet she's not going to a big Power Four school. Now she might be one of those portal kid pickups. Who knows? But she could do it. And what I said in this thread is I hope this doesn't get the parents out there kind of beating the drum saying, well, my kid can hit. If you can hit, they'll hit you. But the challenge is wasting an at bat when you've got, six or nine other kids that do it better just because you want to hit. Somebody made the reference that was why Kennedy transferred. And I'm like, poof. I don't think that's the only reason she transferred. No different than the girl, that played at JMU. She could, and she did, and she picked the school that let her, right? Not everybody's stuck in their way to say we only POU and all of our pitchers only hit. Because Jackie, you mentioned earlier, looking ahead of saying, where will I fit in? Who will I be replacing? Or, you can't look ahead. It's a year-to-year recruiting now. But you have to look at the style and the culture, and you have to be able to ask those questions ahead of time. Well, I've had some baseball guys that say, yeah, I don't want to be a PO only, I want to hit. And, they make such a stink about it. It lowered their pitching layer because they wanted to hit and their hitting wasn't to that layer. I have a young lady at Maryland that hits the crud out of the ball. She's the 4 spot hitter. I had a college coach when I was helping her in the 8th grade tell me she's not going to pitch in college. I'm like, ma'am, I got a little offended because this kid's a baller. She goes, man, her bat is so much better than her pitching. It's going to be a mismatch. And, her and her parents listened and they really took that in and they thought, what is best for this kid? And can she pitch? Sure. Could she pitch in high school? Little bit. But man, are they going to take away what she does great? No. And that's the kind of advising and why I call myself an advocate that happens in the process early enough to where you don't get to college and then you're sitting on the bench, only pitching and going, I'm going to quit and go be on another team because I want to hit. I mean, either you can or you can't. So I loved hearing that. And then, coaches have choices, and we're seeing a lot of this now. Just as student athletes, like I had a coach ask a travel ball coach of a kid that I represent, say, "Why didn't this kid come to my camp?" And I'm like, "Because she has choices, and there's only a certain amount of time that the kid can go to the camp. There's only a certain amount of time that the coaches have camp. I mean, it's a real mix and match and figuring out where this kid can play and what the right fit for it is, and it's a timing thing. So you can't just say, "Oh, I only want to go to these 5 schools." Well, if you can, you might have an opportunity, but that's not enough of a target to go after. So, the student athletes that can play at that elite layer have choices too. So it's not just all about the choice being in the college coach's hand, right? It's not flipping to them. So. Um, I'm reading all my notes here. Oh, this is a good one. So it follows up with what I was just saying is the student athletes don't always get to go where they want to go. Like if you ask a kid in the 7th, 8th grade, 9th grade, what was on their target list? I do a decision grid. So by the time we get to the end, we flip flop that spreadsheet around so much I can see where they started and where they ended. And where they ended usually is their dream school because they've learned more about what it is all about and what their choices are. And, where you wanted to play doesn't necessarily mean it was the right place for you and your fit and your education and all those cultural things that come into play. So it's quite interesting. But a lot of people go out with what I call the NCAA model, which is go to camp, email coaches, and then you get to choose. And I'm like, what? I heard one of the publications do a recruiting thing the other day, and I'm like, no, you don't get to pick when your visits are. There's just so many details and rules to the process. Um, so Jackie, I did want to mention the publications because a lot of people ask me like, who do I follow? I love Softball America because I'm a recruiter and I don't like the rankings. I don't like ranking kids before the college coaches speak because I see the college coaches as the ultimate decision maker. They're the one giving the roster spot, they're the one giving the money, they're the ones that get to decide. Plus, it is their job to go out there and assess these student athletes. And really, I've always said the top 50, maybe top 100 are worthy of a post about your talent level, like, oh, you're top 100 in Softball America. I think that's worthwhile because I know what they've done to investigate the talent. They're talking to college coaches, not travel ball coaches, not parents, not people nominating or paying, all of those things. They're not doing any of that. I just want to make sure I'm not missing a message there. If you see something there, Jackie, since I'm on video, if you don't mind reading them, I see a 4 go up. Uh, so then that's why I like Softball America. I think they do a great job of assessing it, and it doesn't feel, and I have to say feel or appear to be so driven by travel ball coaches whose whole goal is to get publications to write about you. I think false marketing and false information only hurts a student athlete. So that's just kind of I have a very strong stance on that. I've stopped paying for 2 of the publications because I just can't pay money. If you're ranking 7th and 8th graders, even 9th graders makes me nervous. If you want to make a top 100 list, that's great, but they're not saying this is the number one kid in the country. I like that better. So thoughts on Softball America, Jackie?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret in my world that I'm not paid by any of these websites or publications at all. But I would say that I found Softball America to be probably the most on target for where we're going in the softball world. There's a whole bunch of others, right, that are out there. It is depending on what your flavor is, what you're looking for. I do think, that Softball America's on the right path, but
Mhm.
everybody has their own opinion. One thing I wanted to talk about was I was able to see a little bit behind the scenes this year in terms of recruiting for a number of athletes that were highly ranked in this past class. And one athlete, which most people wouldn't attribute to me sort of following, was definitely highly ranked. Had this one dream school, and it was the thing on the side that nobody talked about. What we all knew that this was her one dream school, and then all of a sudden, on the big date, all the calls are coming on in, and who doesn't call her dream
Ah,
school? This is one of
ah,
top 10 kid in the nation. Okay,
ah.
right? Per these all these things, right? So doesn't call, continues, goes on all these visits, XYZ, you know, still the school hasn't called. And so, they're just holding on, hoping. They're going through the visits, so on, keeping their options open because now you're in a timetable, right? Because now it's a game because you don't know when that roster spot will close. Because what they don't tell you is if, let's say, they need, I don't know, we'll just say a catcher, right? And they're bringing 3 or 4 catchers because they don't know where they're going to commit. So now you're waiting to see who commits, who doesn't commit, and finally a spot opened up at the student stream school because there were some people who said no. So
Right.
this is all when they're finally able to have those conversations and be provided, hey, you can, come here on this spot. If you can imagine what leads up to that, and that's why it's so important for all of these players to focus on what you need to and really grind, right? And because when it push comes to shove, you can't just say, I want this one school, because if that spot didn't open up for a top
Oh,
10,
yeah.
right? They wouldn't have any other options. So you can't put your eggs in all in one basket because you doesn't matter if you're a top 10 kid or you're not even ranked. You have to keep everything on the table to the last moment.
And it happens every year, Jackie, on September 1st or whatever the date is, right? We work off our student athlete spreadsheet and we rework it and we remix it because some of the ones that you get that phone call with and you think you're in that thing, but I mean, we follow them so closely. We know who they're in up against, right? But doesn't mean they're that the same for the college, doesn't mean that they get their number one pick. I had one college coach one time go, "Man, I didn't get my top 10 pitchers." what did I do wrong? And she was asking me, and I said, you didn't do anything wrong. It was just who was out there and where they all shuffled. And some of them were shocking where they picked, right? And then lo and behold, she gets a kid that I got late. Like this dad came to my door and literally handed me cash and said, what did we do wrong? That kid's now pitching at Wichita State and she's doing really, really good, you know? So it's just amazing, like how it works out, and just having that knowledge to be able to help them through the process and help them understand the decisions that are made. But where we started this call at the top was seeing the results of these kids in college. I currently have 304 student athletes playing in college at all layers. It is crazy. And I sat there at Tarleton going, whoa, I got three on Tarleton. I got three on Akron. I got three at South Dakota State. I got one at Austin P. And they're all playing each other. It was pretty cool, right? It was pretty neat to see it all come out, but just seeing how their journey went and how they all got where they went was not always in our control and not always a happy experience either. And I mean, there are parents that have expectations that they're going to get what they want. And if they would flip it around and say, I want my kid to go where she's valued and where she's going to be treated, you know, the way she wants to be treated. I mean, my middle daughter, she did not need anybody to be up her, you know what. My youngest daughter, if you weren't going, let's go, you know, she wasn't giving you her best, right? So they each have a different way, and each kid is individual. That's why my model has worked so many years, because I do what's in the best interest of the student athlete, not the brand, not their, you know, club owner or the head coach. And a lot of people have a lot of opinions. Well, my friend Jackie said that I should be doing this, and you're like, cute, thanks, Jackie. But you know, you want to hear people's thoughts, but you have to have a little bit more experience and a platform of decision making to do it. But it was interesting to see how some of these have rolled out over the last 8 years, because these kids that are playing in college, we've known at least 8 years. But it is more talent, more higher end talent. And to get on the field, you know, there's still a lot of people that are not understanding the roles and the responsibilities. If you're not a full time player as a freshman, it's okay. Find what's important, find what you're special at, and be really, really good at it. Jackie, you made a mention about, you know, pitchers going two ways. This is the first time, and I was a slapper coach, that I have two personal kids that are in my database that switch sides. They're hitting right-handed now, and I haven't seen them bunt in a game, but they're saying they're still, you know, bunting when needed. But I started watching some of the slappers this weekend, and I think it's true. I think you're missing that extra inch of natural power that didn't get defined at this elite level. So that was a new aha. I have not seen that in years. And, you know, to anybody else's eye, they may not know that, you know, because they may not know the kid the way I've known him. But that's interesting, because I used to say, oh, you know, switch hitting, there's no such thing because you don't see it in college. Well, it's happening. There's a lot of people turn their kid because they're petite, they're small, they think they're fast. Well, Tia Warsup on Oklahoma. I'm going to give a shout out to that CSA kid because I love that kid. She has not been on the field as much as, you know, we all thought she would, because she is exceptional speed and talent. And it was just finding the right place in the right time and the people that were in it above her. But man, she stole some bases last night for Oklahoma State. We were cheering. I mean, just out loud. But that's the kind of thing that takes time to see that she can hit. That was a kid I said one time, "Oh my gosh, why do they bunt her every time?" And my husband said, "Wait till you see her hit." And she hit home runs in the ninth grade as a slapper. And she's, you know, a petite, fast little thing, right? So you don't think that's going to happen. Well, until you see that she has that game ability to take that quick jump, and the catcher bobbled the ball and she stole third. And you're like, when does that happen in college? Well, that's Tia Warsup, right? So you see that type of thing happening and you just go, whoa, you know, that's elite level talent. But that's a kid that can slap and can hit, but she's always done that. You don't see as many of that anymore. Yes, Jackie.
I also think that there is so much competition, right? As the sport grows and you have more and more athletes, you know, playing softball longer now with, you know, scholarships, things like that, wanting to play softball longer, you're going to get better and better athletes. And the competition is going to be so intense that you have to seize that opportunity. I mean, if you look at, right, like Barker for Oklahoma, I mean, she you can't take her out of the lineup now because she's just hitting bombs, right? And but other players, if they can't figure it out, there's somebody else right behind you. So now it's not only, you can't have a mentality that's not resilient. You not only have to be a decent player, but you have to be willing to be a dog, be there, be fully involved, whether you're playing or not, or whether you struck out and maybe lost your first opportunity and now you need to get hungrier. And so now you can't just have an okay average mind and just a good bat, and so on. You have to be elite and think elite in each and every aspect of your game.
I love that you hit the mindset thing because that's something I told a coach the other day. I had an SEC coach call me over the weekend and say, "All right, who's on my list? Who's the 27, 28, 29?" I think there's a mindset change. I think all of these rule changes and making it tougher to be a student athlete to play in college has switched the mindset to the 26 and below because I'm seeing a little bit more hustle. I'm seeing a little bit more grind. I'm not seeing what we say in Spanish, the pobrecita sitting there feeling that they were picked upon or somehow chosen against. I would challenge anybody if you're feeling like things aren't really going your way, man, I'll give you 15 minutes to a half hour. I've always said I give free phone calls to people if they want some free advice. Just because the mindset piece is so important, Jackie. You hit the nail on the head. You have to be elite in your mindset. And my partner that was supposed to be on here with me tonight, Devin, is a mindset coach. I have plenty of them up on my partner page, and they each have their own design and style for the type of mindset coaching that they do. But you got to have that now too. It is not as easy as just being Barker and Coleman and all these elite players doing elite things. You have to have a mindset of resilience and getting through the tough times and being able to fight the fight and wondering why, M at Houston, making that triple play, and yet she's, only had a couple opportunities in the lineup. Well, guess what? She made such a great, impact to the coach and such a can-do attitude. That coach is going to use her more. You don't even have to say anything. I mean, I have people, they don't like my answer to this one. People ask me all the time, well, should my kid go talk to the coach? I'm like, about what? What are you talking to the coach for? The coach is there to help you, but not to answer what, coach, what do I got to do to get more playing time? I was like, "What?" I mean, I coached 10 and unders, and I didn't even think that was a good question to ask. You've got to have that own self-assessment, and I told a parent this weekend, because again, I got 3 phone calls this weekend about, my kid's a freshman and, things aren't going the way we thought, and this is what I said, "What are they doing? What does their workout look like?" Everything they were doing was exactly what everybody else on the team was doing. How are you going to have a breakthrough? How are you going to be different or better if you're doing exactly what everybody else is doing? You have to be working on your own. You have to be figuring out what piece of it that needs to be specialized for you and work outside of what everybody else is doing. And they're like, well, no, man, there's no excuses. You can't do what everybody else does because you're going to end up all being the same. You have to break out, focus on what you're good at, and be really, really special on that. And I think you hit that, Jackie, too, on being able to be 100% and be great at it all. Especially as a freshman, you're bumping somebody who's ahead of you off their game, right? And you,
100%. At the end of the day, it it's really about your mindset, right? Of course, your ability, but how do you really max out that potential? And I think this past for the 25s and for the 26 is sort of things that I was looking at is how are the groups really working together, that group of freshmen, so that signing class, all right, or that commitment class, depending on where they're at in their year, how are they working together and how does that translate to the team as goes? So for example, I've been watching clearly Oklahoma's classes, I've been watching Florida's classes, UCLA's classes, and how they're interacting with each other and what their workouts are sort of looking like, and as a group, because now, with messaging, Snapchat, everything, now they communicate what they're doing to each other. Now they're already starting as classes working with each other from wherever they're, living in the United States, and they're trying to max out their potential to a collegiate level as seniors, juniors, so on in high school. And now you're seeing that translate, which is also another reason why you're seeing these freshman classes break out, because you're seeing it translate. And now you're saying, well, what programs, what are already coming in with that mentality, right? And you see them in the top 5. And those are your programs where freshmen are already coming in, already thinking as collegiate players.
And that is so bingo, right? Because if you also then go back to our comment about, Patty going to certain travel clubs, I know certain coaches that do go to certain travel clubs first to see if they can find that kid because they want that culture that that travel organization is creating. And this was my next thing is it's not just the brand, it's the people in the brand that make the brand, right? And this is something I noticed. I love branding. Usually I have my logo on, which is ironic I don't. But wear your brand wherever you are. And I've had people say, well, it's extra money, blah blah blah. No, wherever your feet are, wear your brand. Whatever your travel club is that you've invested in and they've invested in you, wear the brand and be proud of it, because when you get to college, wear your brand. I see a lot of kids put logos on their helmets or on their visors and their shirts, and I think that's cute. I think they should be proud of it. But what, 20% of them don't finish after their freshman year of the school that they committed to and put on their jersey all those years. So, some of that you have to be careful of. But I think you have to be very committed to your brand and where you are today and be all in. And like Jackie said, all in on the culture. And each team has their own culture and what they're expecting out of you, and you got to know if you fit into that culture or not. And it's a bad idea if you're just trying to be something different instead of being you. Any thoughts on branding, Jackie?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a time and a place. I think if you are, depending on what you're doing and where you are, you should definitely wear your brand. But one thing that I say is once you've made that commitment and or signed somewhere, know who you're wearing and what you're wearing and what you're posting. Because if, let's say, you're signed to LSU and you're wearing a Nebraska shirt working out, I mean, that doesn't do it. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have to be careful. That's a big thing. But yeah, I mean, you should definitely be representing where you're coming from. I mean, you notably see, specifically, because Schumacher and then some other players as well, clearly as Batbusters are doing well. Um, they rep Batbusters all the time. Right. And
Right.
so that's their number one thing. Oh, look at all of us here together, or Batbuster, so on, and even in their collegiate aspects, they're still representing Batbusters. So there is a sense of pride that you should always have for your travel team and represent that brand. But it's knowing how and when.
Yes.
What you don't want to also be that kid on the team that's like, oh, I'm going to UCLA, and everybody else on your team may not be going to UCLA or like that type of caliber. And you know, what does that look like? So it's a balance.
Right. And that's an interesting thing. People always hear, oh, well, why don't rankings matter? But then all of a sudden, when you in high school, like, people say high school doesn't matter and rankings don't matter. And then you get to college and they go, oh, the number one person on XYZ publication, played at the high school and these were her max prep rankings, and you're just like, oh my God, my head is shaking. Like, where'd they get all those numbers? What it is that the media department of the college hands them a piece of paper and it's very football driven. And I've gotten this from several coaches. And football is all about high school because they don't have club football. And it is, they have ranking systems that are much more defined, and maybe there's more than we know of, but they come off pretty good, right? And they give them ESPN 5-star ratings and all kinds of stuff. And I think we're getting closer to that, but it is funny to hear it. Like, everybody preaches the rankings don't matter, and we're ranking seventh and eighth graders that don't show up, in the top 100 when they get there, but they are still top 100. And so we talked about Softball America, which you and I both admire a lot. The other one that I use, and I like the app, I literally pay the money for the app because I'm not a person who's going to read a bunch of articles. If it doesn't come off in 2 seconds, you've lost me. But I like D1's app. You can see where they're ranking. You can see, their games for the next day. And I know ESPN does it too, but for some reason, the D1 app just really works for me. So a nice plug for them. I do enjoy their app and I can find what I need. And I just wish it would hyperlink over to their stats page, because that's the next thing I do. I watch the game by watching the app, and then I click on their stats page and read about their bios and their current stats. So that's just being an Uber fan's request. I wish they would do that a little deeper, because I'll have three TVs going, my iPad, my phone, and then I had an iPad and a phone going at a game. So that's even funnier. But you know, and then with Jackie's group on Thursdays, Jackie, tell us more about your group. But I get on there and my brain is just bursted at that point. So this week I took notes. So
Yeah.
I'm going to be a little bit better of a contributor this week. But
I love it.
tell us
Well,
more about your space on Thursday.
so we typically meet at 8:30 Eastern, so 7:30 Central. We're gonna go an hour later this week, just because for my wedding I have a tasting. So we're gonna be 9:30/8:30 for Central Time, and basically it's a whole group of people. We have some members from Softball America. We have super spacers, as I like to say, the people who really contribute to the softball world, like Jessica, who's down in the space. Hey, Jessica. Of course, Sherry comes along as well, and all different people from the softball world each week, and we just talk about what happened the weekend prior, where we're going this current weekend. So it would be week 2 to week 3, and we break down every single team's success, and for any notables, and then also the challenges. And we talk about the rankings and where we think people are going to go, but more so we look at the entire landscape, and that includes stats. So I know that for me, that's a lot, but we have some statisticians who come up on there and really break it down so that the fans, you all, and also players, and coaches can sort of see what that all looks like. Because man, so many games, it can be tiring. By the end of this weekend, I was dying.
Yeah, I
So we
can't even
just got.
remember the game we were talking about. Oh, I said something about Washington playing UCLA, and you're like, well, look that up. And I'm like, oh my God, I had to go look up the last year's times that they played each other and what the likelihood was and, what it would look like because now they're, not in the Pac-12 anymore. So that is a fun space on Thursday nights. And I just friended all of you that weren't my friend here. And likewise, go connect with all of us because Jackie does a great space on Thursdays. And I usually do TikTok at this time, 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock on Central Time with Coach Margot, Coach Devin, and Jamar, and we just have a unique personality fit. People seem to like us, and we go live and banter at each other. And we're very different and come from different backgrounds, but we bring a lot to the table. And somehow it always turns to recruiting, so that's why they have me on there because heck, these younger student athletes and parents are always wanting to get recruited. So and then I usually do Twitter 8 o'clock Central on this time, and I'm always looking for a topic. So if you see something that's happening out there, like I said, the switch hitters, or when Tara brought up the pitching and versus the hitting, I think those were great things. And my advice to everybody is always be a student of the game. It's changed so much. I didn't even play. I'm previous to Title IX. It wasn't even a thought. We were just playing women's ball till our 40s and just having fun and just my own kids coming through and having the opportunity to play. And my daughter is still coaching 10 years into it, and my youngest one, if you don't know, is an NIL litigation and Title IX attorney, and she played with the Romeros and the Knightons and all these kids, that were just superstars, the Cruzes in the sport, and ended up playing college soccer. So that's kind of my backstory to why I got into recruiting. And 655 commitments later and almost 1,200 kids. I mean, I don't think that anybody has that exposure to the experiences, and that's really what I offer the student athletes. And staying with them until they graduate college is not. I mean, that was a gift when I created that strategy because it was literally a business plan. I sat down and wrote, and I said, I'm going to stay with them till they graduate because, man, it's not so easy when they get there. But and then the last one, and unless Jackie, you have anything else, I saw the college travel schedule. If people haven't seen what these kids go through, I was watching Akron down in Tarleton, and they were still playing on Sunday. I came home; it was too cold for me, and I was 3 hours away. And I came home, and they were still playing. And then they had to get on a plane. They had to fly all the way back to Akron, Ohio. They had to get up and go to school, and maybe they didn't have school today because it was a holiday, but I remember coming back one time with my daughter. They were playing in Florida, and I came back. I didn't get into the airport till 1 o'clock. It was icy. My suitcase barely rolled, and I wanted to cry. And I'm like, oh my God, these student athletes do this every time. And Matthew, I like your idea about improving defense. That would be a great one. I even like the concept of better throwing techniques and getting some experts on here. So I'm going to write that down. But gosh, what a great idea. Jackie, what else do you got? Let's close it out.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's the recruiting world in and of a sense in softball. I feel like I don't know how you do it, Sherry. It is ever evolving with the growth of this sport. Everything continues to get more and more competitive and more complex. And that's a good and a bad thing. But what it really comes down to is that mindset mentality and really being able to understand what the word resilience means and grit. And those two things, if student athletes can invest in those things, then everything else should go along with it. Their practice should get better, their skills should get better, their fitness, every aspect of their world should improve. And I think that's what college coaches are looking for. Patty Gasso was on a podcast recently where she mentioned that she sees kids sometimes get walked 2 or 3 times. And so she really is looking at what they're doing off the ball. Are they cheering for their friends? Are they sitting there, just sort of moping after getting struck out? Are they carrying their bags to to the car? All those things. And that's where, if you invest in grit and resilience, those things come along with it as well. It's about being a full time student athlete and gamer, not a part time. And at the end, that's where you see all these freshmen pop off, and that's where you will find success.
And I'm going to double up on this one because you are an educator, you're a doctor in education. Is they've got to get the education piece down. And I know everybody's talking about NIL and all this money. I am still a person who 150% values the education. To get this education and to be a student athlete, man, that is just everything. It just, I always say, and I hold out my arm, you're building the family tree. Build the family tree and keep building it, make your next generation better. So Jackie, thank you for saving me tonight. I would have been talking to myself.
Anytime.
And thank you, our audience who joined in. We appreciate you guys, and come back. You can follow me at CSA_athletes, and I'll always put what's going on out here. And Jackie, please follow her. She's got a great following, and join her podcast or her live X Live on Thursdays. And stay a student of the game. Let's go. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.